Hi, this is Al Wilson. I am in the studio live, but you can understand and concentrate more on what's being said if you only listen and don't. There's no visual other than just the still I put up. Tonight is June 22nd, Friday. It's approximately almost 9:30 at night. This is a third 30-minute or 25-minute show I've recorded. I had come here tonight intending to release some bombs live where they couldn't be intercepted until no one would know what I was going to say till after I said it. To find I don't have a live show anymore. It's all pre-recorded. So I'm going to have to think how to get you the data in a way that it cannot be intercepted. Some very important things that already a lot of people have been killed to shut them up. So, but in any case, every Tuesday at 1 p.m., every Saturday at 5 p.m., something will show on Access Tucson. But what I was going to reveal tonight, I'm going to have to find an alternate means or figure out how to craft it to maybe survive it, or maybe I'll just have to let it hang out and we'll just be a flip of the coin and we'll see. But here we go.
We all know who Nelson Rockefeller is. He began work in Latin American affairs back in the Roosevelt administration, and this was really an intelligence position. His task basically was to monopolize the raw materials of Latin America for the United States, excluding the Europeans. So we have, a good glimpse into the way the Rockefellers do business there. By the end of World War II, Nelson had been dealing with Germans living in South America for quite a while, which is obviously a potential embarrassment that David Ben-Gurion took great advantage of. Basically, he ambushed Nelson Rockefeller one day by showing him all of the documented material he had of Nelson working with these Nazis hiding out in Brazil and other parts of South America. And Nelson said, "Okay, what do you want?" He says, "Well, we want an Israeli state, and you can deliver the votes of the Latin American nations in the UN." Well, the deal was struck. That's how Israel became a state. And, this was revealed by John Loftus and Mark Ahrens in their book, The Secret War Against the Jews, which used eyewitnesses as well as CIA documentation to corroborate all of this. Of course, Nelson died, while he was having sex with female staffer Megan Marshak, who eventually would receive $50,000 and a deed to a Rockefeller New York townhouse in the will. So apparently he was very thankful to her.
Yes.
David Rockefeller is probably, the most successful in terms of power wielding. He went to the London School of Economics, which is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And, he was heavily influenced there by Harold Lasky of Britain's Socialist Party. David worked for the OSS in North Africa and France during World War II, which explains his intelligence ties today. He became board chairman and CEO of Chase Manhattan Corporation. He joined the Council on Foreign Relations, which we'll talk about later, as early as 1941. And 30 years later, he formed the Trilateral Commission with generous donations from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. And he had a refocused one world strategy for the whole thing. David came straight out. In his memoir, he wrote, quote, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it." Since 1952, only one presidential election featured non-CFR members from both parties at the same time. That was Johnson Goldwater in '64. And when Johnson won, he populated his administration with 387 CFR members. Okay, these people are policy makers. Sometimes, I'd hate to say it, but reducing our presidents to the status of puppets. They get their instructions and they pass them along, and they're very, very important positions in the administration. Reagan's first-term administration featured 313 CFR members. Clinton's administration numbered nearly 100. President Obama is not CFR, but the top levels of his administration are filled with CFR members, which I list in a special chapter on Obama's administration.
can the citizenry do to thwart this initiative by these very highly organized, very connected, very well-funded organizations?
Well, my first target would be the Federal Reserve System, with which Americans were saddled in 1913 and has been a blight on this country ever since. I could give you a bit of history of it, if you like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the central banks, first of all, central banks are nothing new in America. That, when we were a British colony, we used to print our own money. It's called colonial scrip. And it was printed according to the demands of trade and industry, and it was done without charging any interest. This changed with the Currency Act of 1764, which was forced upon the colonials by British Parliament at the urging of the Bank of England. Suddenly, colonists had to accept British currency and pay interest on it, and this caused an economic depression and unemployment. And Benjamin Franklin maintained that this was the principal cause of the Revolution. Okay, so we win the revolution, we kick England out of here. Who comes along but Alexander Hamilton? He wants to create a central bank overseen by wealthy elite class. His opponents accused Hamilton of being an agent of international bankers. Thomas Jefferson was among the accusers. But he succeeded, and the Bank of North America was created in 1781. It practiced what is called fractional reserve banking, which simply is lending money it does not possess at interest. In other words, banking typically is a scam, and when you do it on the national level, you get to make an awful lot of money. The new bank was tasked with printing America's currency, which immediately plummeted in value. 4 years later, Congress refused to renew the Bank of North America, and due to ruinous inflation and fraudulent practices, Hamilton didn't give up. He went at it again and established another central bank in 1791, first bank of the United States. About 80% of its capital came from private investors, among them foreign bankers like the Rothschilds. The new bank soon became the path of its, it just soon followed the same path of its predecessor, created inflation in which prices rose 72% in 5 years. After 20 years of causing ruin in America, the bank came up for renewal in 1811, and the charter was defeated, obviously, in Congress. Nathan Rothschild, who was running... He wasn't running the Bank of England yet, but he was well established in England. He made a threat. He said either the application of the charter is granted or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war. Well, the War of 1812 took place, and it did spell disaster for this nation. It drained its treasury and destroyed the national credit standing, and we simply had to renew a central bank charter because of it. This occurred in 1816, and the government issued a new 20-year charter to the Second Bank of the United States. The new charter was identical to the previous one, meaning 80% of the prime stockholders were private investors, many of them foreign. Now, along comes Andrew Jackson in 1828. He wins the election. He makes no secret of his opposition to any American central bank, but the current charter is not going to expire until 1836, which would be at the end of a second term if Jackson were reelected. So, in the meantime, what Jackson did was eliminate the bankers' representatives from government service. He fired 2,000 of them out of a total of 11,000 federal government employees. He won re-election in a landslide in 1832, and then he right away went to work, and they removed government deposits from the Second Bank and placed them in state banks. Second Bank president named Nicholas Biddle, who was an agent of Jacob Rothschild in Paris, according to author Eustace Mullins, immediately threatened to create a depression by making money scarce if the charter was not renewed. Biddle called in loans while refusing to extend new ones, and it caused the financial panic and the depression that he promised. Biddle blamed Jackson for the disaster, and the press bought it. So Congress convened and actually, it was called, what historians call the panic session, actually censured Jackson. First time an American president was ever censured by Congress. But Biddle's boasts finally got to him and turned Congress against him. And the Second Bank Charter finally was not renewed. A year later, Jackson survives an assassination attempt by a mentally ill painter named Richard Lawrence. When both of Lawrence's new pistols misfired at point-blank range, I mean, talk about, divine intervention. Lawrence was subdued by a group of bystanders. One of them was Congressman Davy Crockett. In his trial, Lawrence received the verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, despite the attempts of prosecutor Francis Scott Key, the writer of our national anthem. Anyway, Jackson finished his second term, and at the end of the second term, the national debt was entirely paid, and the government was running on surplus that allowed the next president, Martin Van Buren, to distribute funds to the states. I mean, everything was wonderful, so you could see the advantage of not having a central bank. This arrangement in which the U.S. Treasury Department printed American currency without charging interest continued into the next century, despite repeated attempts by European bankers to create economic chaos. These attempts are known today as bank panics of 1873, 1893, and 1907, all of them deliberately created by international bankers who retracted loans and refused to grant new ones. That's what they do every time. That will cause chaos. The Panic of 1907 was clearly instigated by J.P. Morgan as an agent of the Rothschilds. It destroyed a number of American banks and seemed to some a lesson that the U.S. needs a central bank. Okay, so we have now a move toward that, which I have to say, and this was not my word, a conspiracy. It was admitted by the people who were involved at this secret meeting in 1910, called by Senate Republican leader Nelson Aldrich. All of these wealthy bankers met together at a posh resort in 1910 on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. Aldrich had spent the previous 2 years studying Germany's central bank system, and one of the shining lights of that system, Paul Warburg, a German banker, ran the meetings. These meetings were so secretive that only first names were used, and new servants were hired at the resort who did not know the participants. The banking families hatched a plan to ram a central banking act through Congress, which in 1913 would become the Federal Reserve System. A huge propaganda campaign was launched through bribed newspaper editors and publishers, and through academics, one of them being a certain professor at Princeton named Woodrow Wilson. Now, Wilson finally gained the White House in 1912 election. He was the bankers' candidate. They knew he was going to get the Federal Reserve passed through. He was running against the incumbent, though, William Howard Taft, who was opposed to the banking bill. And Wilson's chances were pretty poor, and so the bankers decided to convince Teddy Roosevelt to run for the presidency in a new progressive party funded by Morgan executives. Roosevelt stole votes from Taft, and Wilson won. So here we have Wilson in the White House now, and despite fierce resistance from congressmen like Charles Lindbergh Sr., Louis McFadden, Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. There is some question about the ratification of this act, as congressional vote was held just 2 days before Christmas of that year, when many of the lawmakers were not present. One rumor claimed that there were just 3 senators present for this vote, which is not a quorum, obviously. We called the Library of Congress, trying to find out, a record of the ayes and nays on this vote, and we were astonished to learn that the record of this vote was missing.
Missing.
It was missing, yes. Later on, another of the persons in the Library of Congress said, "Oh no, we found it now, and here's a big tally of the vote." I just thought it was very suspicious that it was missing at first, and all of a sudden turns up. Anyway, following its passage, Lindbergh Sr. Glumly predicted, quote, "From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. The invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized." Now, near the end of his last term, Wilson admitted, too late, "I have unwittingly ruined my country. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men."